Only a 12th level intellect has the slightest hope of surviving what you are about to experience.
Did you ever used to get like a bunch of like Batman toys and stuff for Christmas? Was that
there
something you'd
was.
ask for?
I don't remember Christmas specifically, but that does remind me of a story I may or may not have told you. A birthday party I had at like a Chuck E. Cheese's, and I was 5 or 6, and had all my whatever preschool friends or whatever over at the party. There was like 20 kids there with me. I may be this may be an exaggeration because
Probably.
I was a tiny
I
child.
don't believe
and
you
there's
had that
probably
many
not that
friends
many
at that
people.
age. Yeah,
Thank you.
Probably
That's
like
why.
3
That's
people.
why. Yeah, but
And if you count Chuck E. Cheese.
right. He was there. He was my pal.
Yeah,
So
you're one pal.
so I'm opening presents, and I distinctly remember I opened this Batman action figure. Oh, cool, thank you. And I passed it along. I opened this toy. Oh, cool, thank you. And then I opened one that was like a 90s era arc. What's his name? It's a Batman. It was when the other guy became Batman. I don't remember this. The other
Kilmer?
guy. No, in the comics when it's not Batman anymore. It's not Bruce
Azrael.
Wayne. Yeah.
Jean Paul Valley.
Sure.
Whatever.
Yeah, Azrael. When
Azrael.
and I got
Azbats.
that an action figure of but I already had that action figure, and so all these previous presents I had been going, oh yeah, thank you, and this one I just went, oh, and then passed it along. And apparently the kid that gave it to me started crying, but I don't remember this. And my parents had this like really long conversation with me about like, you can't do that. That's very disrespectful. Which I apparently I still feel bad about it.
Yeah.
22 years later.
That's crazy. Yeah, I definitely had like a few Christmases where I'd be like, oh my god, it's a Bat Cave, or it's a Batmobile, or it's like Tim Drake Robin. You can never find that in the stores. And that's always fun. My mom was
like
good at finding me
Christmas
good stuff.
presents for my little kid cousin. I just went with that, like, what's something that he vaguely will enjoy, because I know my present won't be like the present that he will love, so it doesn't matter as long as it's something that the parents understand that I put any amount of thought into.
Right.
He'll just keep that one present. And
Well,
is that a good intro, Ted? Are you
that's a
satisfied
great
with
intro.
that? Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to 12th Level Intellects, everybody. This is a DC Animated Universe podcast hosted by the Watchtower Database. I'm James Strecker, and this young, handsome man on the screen before me is named...
Who nobody else can see because it's an audio podcast.
What's your name?
Ted Kendrick.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah,
I was
name.
really worried for a second that I had never met you before. I mean, really, I haven't technically.
It's only
but...
episode 7 of our podcast.
Is it really?
I think so.
That's actually farther in than I assumed we were, and I'm the one that writes the numbers on the things. So, yeah, we haven't had a different episode than normal today. We interviewed Batman Adventures editor Scott Peterson a couple months ago, and we finally have that ready for your ear holes. It's taken me a while, amongst other projects, to get that going. It may or may not be longer episode than normal. You can look at the time code right now and figure that out for yourself. It's a pretty fun conversation we had with him, though. I would subtitle the conversation as Scott Peterson, aka the man that gives more praise to other people than himself.
That's humble. That's good.
Yeah, no, he's a good guy. He was really fun to talk to, and he seemed like he was genuinely interested in everything, every question we had for him and stuff. So that's always nice.
And he was there at the DC Comics offices at a really interesting time. So he had a lot of cool stories about people he was working with, like legends in the comic book industry who were just so human to him. Like they would go out for lunches and stuff. So it's a good conversation.
Yeah. Yes, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed listening to it another 20 times while editing it. So, Scott, if you're listening to this, that you might be, since I'm going to send you the link. Thank you for talking with us about us measly little people that mean nothing, and get 500 views on their podcast every time. But whatever.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's still 500 more people than I would expect to listen to us babble on about nothing. Babble on
for 3 hours or whatever.
Yeah, yeah, whatever this is. Well, let's try to keep that quicker. You had a couple of things,
I got some
news-ish things.
There's some stuff in the news. So, first of all, we've got a Teen Titans live-action show coming to DC's upcoming streaming app. Don't know what that app is going to be called yet, but it's going to be coming out sometime in 2018. But the Teen Titans live show is produced by Greg Berlanti, the same guy who does Arrow, Flash, Supergirl, Black Lightning, all those sort of things. And it's going to be... I mean, it looks great. They've been releasing some promo images of the
Robin
main characters.
and Hawk and Dove.
Yeah, so great, far. Yeah. But I think we also have Beast Boy, Starfire, and Raven, who are part of the team. So we're going to be probably seeing them soon.
Oh, yeah. I've seen the casting shenanigans around Starfire where everyone's freaking out about ethnicity. And it's like, it doesn't matter. You've never seen what she's orange.
she's an alien. Yeah. It's like no different than Gamora in Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, you know, she's a black woman, but she's a green woman. So
I don't know. Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Whatever. People gonna peep. So.
Yeah. Well, so the costumes we've seen so far have been looking awesome, I think. They're really true to the characters from the comics. I never thought Hawk and Dove would translate well to live action because they're
the
Dove
are a
little weird.
The Dove goggles look a little bit goofy, but that's like the only aspect. The rest, I was surprised too that like instead of going the like Arrow route of making it like just a barely colored in like grungy kind of weird leather version. I mean, it's still like a weird leather version, but I don't think you'd really be able to do a as true of a recreation without it being like a material that
I wouldn't want to see like spandex or something, you know, like this stupid, is much more armor sort of. But yeah, I think Hawk and Dove are really interesting choices for the show. They're Teen Titans in the comics, but we saw them like the last time we really saw them featured was in Justice League Unlimited, and it was the brother version. So there's Hank Hall and Don Hall.
I wonder if they'll do a Don Hall is dead thing, or if it'll just be unspoken and that's just who Hawk and Dove are.
Right. Well, this new ones is like they're not related, so there's a bit of a romance involved with their joint powers. So like Hawk's kind of they're powered by the Lords of Order and Chaos, and Hawk's a little more chaotic. Dove is the order that keeps him grounded. So
they should have cast Fred Savage like they did in the cartoon.
Yeah,
as the girl. Anyway, this is not set in the CW stuff, right?
As far as we know. I don't think so. I mean, Robin's in it, so if anything, it might maybe the Supergirl universe, but like that's not confirmed at all. So it'd
be kind of cool. I don't think they'll do it. It would be kind of cool if it was set in the normal Arrowverse, and then that was their way to bring in Batman. But it probably isn't. So
no. I bet it has the possibility of becoming a show that crosses over with everything else. So that, like that and Black Lightning have potential to be part of the annual CW verse crossover, you know. But we'll see. Yeah.
And I did not do any news because I'm a loser, but also because it'll be like 2.5 weeks before anyone hears this, and I don't want to. Yeah. But you had like something else that's not as timely.
One more. Right. So Injustice 2, that is the fighting game done by what's it called?
Heard of it.
NetherRealm, I think. The people who do Mortal Kombat. Yeah, right. Maybe. Do you have it on console? Are you playing it on like Xbox, PlayStation? Which one?
Yeah, I have the Xbox One version.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. I heard that it's gonna be like there's a free trial to play it right now on the console. Like you can play it for free. I think you only level up to a certain point, but so that's kind of cool. That's not my news. I was gonna say I play it on mobile. I have it on my phone.
You've always done that.
Yeah. I played the first one. Now I'm playing the second one, and so they just had a big update just a few days ago where they've introduced this a league thing, so you get to team up with about 20 something other players. And
is it a Justice League?
It is a Justice League, but you call it whatever you want. Yeah. And so it's a good way to collaborate with other players and try to like get more in-game points or whatever. But so there's that. That's a new feature. There's a bunch of new characters. They just released like 5 new characters, and it's already cool because they have characters in here like Hellboy and like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are coming to the game. Like, that's awesome. Okay. But so the mobile app already has Hellboy, and they have like Sub-Zero and Raiden from Mortal Kombat. But now this newest update gave them Jon Stewart, Green Lantern, Power Girl. I'm trying to remember some of the others. Was the
Atom one of them?
Not yet, but he'll be there eventually.
Oh, I saw some ad for him. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's definitely coming to the game, but he's just they've been like releasing him slowly on mobile. They have all the Justice League versions of the characters on there now. Justice League Flash was just added. They have like one main character from all the CW shows, so you can do Arrow, the Flash. They just added Supergirl and White Canary.
Did they do like the voices from the actors? Because I'm pretty sure they did that in the first Injustice.
Yeah, they do. It doesn't have a lot of dialogue on the mobile version, but they are. I did the same thing that I end up doing with every game that I buy, which is unfortunate, but is where I'm getting pretty good at it, and I play the whole like story mode, and then I just stop playing it as soon as I beat the game. So I haven't actually played Injustice unless like friends are over since it came out. But whatever. Or Injustice 2, just to be specific. The mobile app is a little different. It's kind of a swipe game, you know. But yeah, it's fun.
I guess it's time to transition into the main topic. This will be weird because we're just going to say go, and then future James puts the thing in, and then we'll wrap it up immediately afterward.
Sounds good.
So here's our interview with Scott Peterson. Ready, set, go. Our very special guest today is none other than Scott Peterson, editor of Batman Adventures and writer on an extensive run on Gotham Adventures, as well as many other familiar characters and properties. It's an honor to have you with us tonight, Scott. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, guys. I'm very pleased to be here.
That is good. We are pleased to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I guess to get started, do you want to tell us how you got started with the comics industry?
It was my second senior year of college, and graduation was rapidly approaching, and I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with my life. I was in a not very good band, and I figured I would try to make a go of it with that and probably get a job washing dishes or something like that. And one night, my then girlfriend, well, it was college, so I was pretty heavily inebriated, and she got me.
There you go.
She asked me if I could do anything in the entire world. What would I do? To not think, to just say it. So I said the truth, which was the most ridiculous thing I could think of in the whole world. And I said I would write a Batman story and Jim Aparo would draw it.
Nice.
And she said, well, how does one make that happen? And I said, well, I know a lot of writers are also editors. So they either start as writers and become editors, or start as editors and become writers. And she knew that my favorite writers in the world were Alan Moore and Denny O'Neil. So the next day, she found the number for DC Comics, and she called them up to find out how one could get an internship at DC. Nice. And then she wrote them a letter pretending to be me. And a couple weeks later, I got a call from Bob Rozakis, the vice president in charge of production at DC Comics, offering me an internship.
That's some girlfriend.
Nice. That's awesome.
She was a keeper. We have now been married for 25 years.
Well,
wonderful.
Congratulations.
Nice, congrats, yeah. Did you not know she wrote the letter?
You know what? I actually did know she wrote the letter. What happened was we tried to write the letter together, and we got into the only fight we had ever had at that point in time. So she kicked me out and wrote it herself, printed it out, handed it to me, and said, sign this. I signed it. She mailed it off. So after I'd been an intern for about 6 weeks in the production department, somebody quit, and Bob Rozakis offered me a full-time job. And after about, whatever it was, 3 or 4 months, that turned into a job in editorial. But I asked Bob, I said, you must get tons of letters asking for internships. Why did you offer it to me? And he said, it was your letter. That was the best one I'd ever received in 20 years of doing this job. Kelly Puckett was Denny O'Neil's assistant editor on the Batman books, and Kelly was quitting to go freelance, so I found out about it through the grapevine and gave Denny my resume, and we had an interview. A few days later, he offered me the job. I was still in production because Kelly hadn't left to go freelance yet. So about a week later, Dick Giordano, the vice president of editorial, comes back. He had been on vacation and asked to see me. I was like, oh, this is awesome. You know, of course, he wants to meet the new Batman assistant editor. Dick, obviously, legendary Batman artist.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. Right. And Dick's like, hey, it's nice to meet you. Listen, Denny should not have offered you that job.
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he was like, it is nothing personal. It's just we're looking for somebody who will be a full-time editor and Denny's assistant editor. So I'm sorry, we need somebody who already has extensive editorial experience. I went running back to Bob. I was like, oh, please, can I have my job back? And he just kind of laughed. He's like, yeah, not a problem.
Nice. Oh, good.
Are you sure Dick Giordano knows about this? He said, yes, Dick Giordano knows about this. But this time I didn't tell anybody until I'd gotten my first paycheck just in case. But yeah, so that is how I got my job.
Quite a
That's
convoluted.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Were you able to follow that okay? Was that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And definitely caught those name drops. There's a lot of famous Bat people.
Yes.
So tell me, I guess, what some of your most proud moments in that job were.
Oh, God.
I'm sure there's a lot. It was a good era for Batman.
There are so many. It's insane. It was my first day on the job, and Denny says, taking a freelancer to lunch, do you want to come with us? And I'm like, of course I want to come with you. So I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. Who is it? And he says, it's Klaus Janson. I was like, yes, I do. It was fantastic. My first day on the job, and I'm going to lunch with Denny O'Neil and Klaus Janson. It was one of those things where this has got to be a dream.
Yeah.
The next day, Denny's like, I'm going out to lunch with Dick Giordano, Pat Bastian, who is Dick Giordano's assistant, and new artist to talk about a possible project. Do you want to come? Once again, I'm like, you know what? You never have to ask me if I want to come to lunch with you. I will always want to go to lunch with you. And this new artist named Joe Quesada.
Oh, new artist. Wow.
He was at the time, and it was amazing.
Yeah,
at lunch, at one point, Joe said, I have to ask you guys, when does the fear go away? When do you stop being nervous all the time that you're not going to really be able to make it in the industry? And Dick said, every single time I turn in an issue, I think, well, that's it. That was the last time anyone's ever going to hire me. I had a good run, but clearly it's over. That was it. And Denny said, I thought it was just me. I thought every time I turn in an issue, I thought, well, this is the time that they're going to figure out I'm a fraud. I don't really know what I'm doing, and no one's ever going to offer me another job. And Joe and I are looking at each other like, oh my God, if Denny O'Neil and Dick Giordano feel that way, what hope do the rest of us have?
So is it safe to say that Batman was your favorite superhero as a kid, or was it someone else?
I loved Superman. I loved Spider-Man. When I was really young, I used to tell people I couldn't decide if my favorites were Flash or Aquaman, because I was one of those little kids who always just had tons of energy.
Yeah.
Couldn't keep still. But the truth is that I said I liked Flash and Aquaman. I loved them both. But I said I liked them as much as I did because I had really blonde hair as a kid, and they both had blonde hair.
Nice.
But at the end of the day, it was always Batman. It really was. I love the rest. I do. But it was always Batman.
That seems to be a pretty common thread, and not to add another question to the 20 questions, but why do you think that is? Why do you think? I mean, that was my favorite. That was Alan Burnett's favorite. That was everybody's favorite.
Denny has, and by the way, I have been told that I have trouble talking about comic books without bringing up Denny O'Neil like every 3 sentences. So you're going to hear that.
No worries.
A very formative influence in my life. But Denny has written quite a bit how many of the superheroes, the classic superheroes, especially the DC ones, are archetypes. As well as having their precedents in Greek gods. Flash being Hermes and blah blah blah. Right? Batman doesn't fit neatly into any one category. He is an amazing amalgamation of so many different influences, and somehow, instead of just being a mishmash, he transcends and has become this unique creation that rises above, stands on its own. So he's got the elements. He is just human, right? He's not a god. Yeah. He's not an alien. He doesn't have a magic ring or anything like that. I love those characters. He is just a human being who, through force of will, has driven himself to be the absolute peak of human perfection, both physically and intellectually, as well as emotionally. He suffered this incredible, horrific tragedy, and he covers it up by either acting like an airhead ditz playboy as Bruce Wayne, or, of course, nobody knows who he is when he's Batman, and he just very quietly tends to go around in the shadows, saving people's lives and making things better, with never mind not looking for gratitude or thanks, but most people don't even know he's been there. That was the Batman that I always loved when I started really getting into comics, into Batman. Loved him when I was a kid. But I'm unusual, I think, in that I didn't actually read comics when I was a teenager. So I actually missed any new comics between roughly 1977, 78 until about 88, I guess, somewhere in there. There was a point to all this, and I completely lost my train of thought. So I'm just going to jump back and say, not to mention, he looks cooler. He's got the cooler costume. And comics is such a visual medium that can't be discounted. How great he looks, including how many great artists have taken a serious run at Batman. And one of the things that's really interesting about Batman is there's more artistic freedom historically for artists to put their stamp on him ever since basically, Neil Adams rejuvenated him with Dini in the late 60s. Since then, you've had these great artists who, again, felt very free to make their Batman their own because he's always so recognizably Batman, whether it's the Bruce Timm style, the Dick Sprang style, Frank Miller, Brian Bolland, Jim Lee, Brian Stelfreeze, whomever. You can put a Tomo on Batman, and there's never any question of that it's the exact same character as Alex Ross's. Most characters have a much, I think, narrower dynamic range visually while remaining unquestionably the same character. Batman, for some reason, you just know instantly. It's almost the way our minds search for patterns, where you see, cats freak out over a cucumber because they think it's a snake or something like that.
Right.
I think there's something about the Batman's most basic elements that just our mind recognizes him as Batman in a way that wouldn't necessarily some of the other superheroes.
That's a great answer. You mentioned the Bruce Timm version being, just as iconic as any of the other ones, and you were involved in that version of Batman from the very beginning, as in the Batman Adventures spin-off comic from the animated series. Can you tell us about your main duties as editor of that book?
Sure. So very early, as Denny's assistant, Kelly Puckett and I overlapped by a couple hours. He trained me for like a couple hours on Friday before he had to go leave for his farewell bash. He's showing me where the various files are. He's given me the rundown. This is what you do. When a script comes in, you log it. Denny edits it. Mark edited. So on. This is where the pencils go. You send it to the letterer. Sends me, gives me the rundown on basically assistant editing 101. Points to this stacks of storyboards piled under his desk and said, "Those are the storyboards for the new animated show that's coming out sometime next year."
Jeez.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "What do I do with them?" He's like, "Look at them if you want." I was like, "Do we not have to approve them?" He said, "I suppose technically we do, but trust me, nobody is going to say, I think you want to redo this one bit. This stuff, there's no point in looking at it. It's good to go."
Yeah.
Nice.
So we would read the scripts when they came in, but that really was almost entirely because it was fun. Out of how many episodes were there in the original run, 160 or whatever there were, I recall one time talking to them and saying, "You know what? I think we'd like to tweak this one little bit." And that was it. Like literally 10 seconds out of however many, out of 70 hours or something like that, because I think it's pretty safe to say those guys knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And you know what? That is also something Dini told me again the first week. You know, before you pick up the red pen to change something, make sure you're making the change to definitely make it better and not just make it different or the way you would have done it. It's really freaking hard to imagine somehow making a story by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm better. So, yeah, again, officially, I guess we had to approve the stuff. It all came in approved. That was just a given.
So you're talking about direct involvement with the cartoon itself.
Yeah. So before I came on board, Dini and Kelly had flown out to L.A. and actually met with the animated crew to talk about the character, like as the show was just getting off the ground. So things were already well on their way when I got in. Again, it was one of my first weeks when Dini and I and Dick were summoned down to Paul Levitz's office. Paul had just gotten the first rough cut of the first episode on Leather Wings. There were no sound effects. There was no music. So this was going to be the first that any of us, except for Paul, had actually seen any actual animation. I have to admit that at the time when I first saw Bruce's designs, you know, I was in full Miller Mazzucchelli grim and gritty mode visually, and his designs, I was like, well, they're striking. I don't know, they're just a little too cartoony for my tastes right now. You know, I was all about Kelly Jones and, you know, Bill Sienkiewicz and that kind of thing, and this was just a little too clean and cartoony for me. Paul started the tape, and within like the first 10 seconds of seeing Batman move, I was like, oh my God, this is phenomenal. This is amazing. And again, all there was the animation and dialogue. So it's really, if you've never watched like a cartoon without any music or sound effects, it's weird how empty everything is until somebody talks. And even without those things, like none of us breathed for 22 minutes until the damn thing was over.
Very nice.
Yeah, just right away. It was, you know, the question was, can they really possibly make another one this good, or is this going to be the only one this good? Obviously, not the only one that good. So, but it really was. I feel like it was clearly a masterpiece from the very first episode, from a rough cut of the first episode.
Nice. Well, how early did the Batman Adventures come into conception? Like, was it before the episode even premiered, before On Leather Wings was even on TV? Did you start working on the book?
Almost exactly that same time. It was early, but it was kind of a no-brainer, right? We should do a mini-series to capitalize on, you know, to tie into this mini-series. A lot of people thought you should just do adaptations of the episodes, and they handed it to me. I'd been Dini's assistant for only like 4 or 5 months, but it was probably just going to be adaptations. But I had been a fanboy buying comics so recently. One of the things I tried to do was think about, like, you know, what would Scott, the college student of 6 months ago, have thought about this idea, you know? And I would have had no interest in buying an adaptation. I thought, well, why don't we do things set in that world? That's just so much more interesting. It's not like it's going to cost more. We have to pay the writer either way. Got to pay the artist either way. We're not going to just print the storyboards. So it's not saving any money. It's just saving time and effort, but that's not a problem. It'll be more fun, more interesting, better creatively. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody. It was so top secret. So my only options were somebody who was already working on the show, and at that point, I didn't know Paul Dini or Bruce Timm yet. So, but Kelly Puckett had read all the scripts, been out for a meeting, he'd read the Bible, he'd seen the storyboards and designs, and he was now freelance. So I thought, all right, I'll go with Kelly. Kelly had written like one issue of Detective Comics a few months earlier that knocked my socks off. Ty Templeton actually just happened to be in the offices like that day for like an hour. So I ran in and told him he wasn't allowed to leave till he said yes. So he said yes. Rick Burchett was one of my favorite artists, so got him in on ink. Yeah. Rick Taylor at the time was the assistant production manager and a huge Batman and animated fanboy, and he having him right there, knowing, again, he had all the reference in-house, so he was perfect because he already knew about the stuff. So it all just kind of fell together in that way. It was still just supposed to be a mini-series, but at some point really early on, Paul Levitz happened to see, I don't remember whether they were Ty's pencils to like the first issue or maybe he was even seeing Rick's inks over Ty's pencil on the first issue. But Paul looked at it and said, wow, this looks great. You know what? We should probably make this an ongoing rather than a miniseries.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at my copy of the first Batman Adventures issue, and I know that in this and all the rest of them, there's a whole couple pages at the end where it's just you talking about the process and answering questions from fans and things like that. That stuff was always almost as interesting or more interesting than the comic itself to read. So
I loved, again, when I was a fan, I freaking loved the letters to the editor. I loved it. It had this sense of community, and as you said, you got these insights into the process. It personalized everything. I absolutely love that, and it's always so funny when you're rereading comics from the 60s or 70s or sometimes 80s, and you recognize the name of a big pro.
Yeah.
From when they were, when they were a fanboy too, and writing into rave about whatever. Love that.
Oh, it totally happens, yeah. Well, can you speak to how Superman appeared in the Batman Adventures in issue number 25? So there's an animated version of Superman and Lex Luthor who appear a lot closer to their comic book counterparts at the time. Like Superman has the mullet and Lex has the big red-haired mane, So
yes, I do.
Yeah. So what? I guess this must have been a few years before Superman the Animated Series started to go into production.
Yeah, that was before the idea of a Superman cartoon was, as far as I know, even a gleam in somebody's eye. We wanted something big for the 25th issue. One of the things that was always disappointing about, in fact, the only thing that was disappointing about the Batman Adventures, it was not just a home run, it was a grand slam artistically, always extremely critically acclaimed, including, I used to have so many fans tell me, it was their favorite comic book. It was the only one they read on a regular basis. I wish I had a copy of it. I made a house ad that was basically nothing but quotes from professionals, big names, Kelly Jones and Neil Gaiman, Matt Wagner, saying how it's their favorite comic book, how much they love it.
Nice.
And saying something like, what do they know that you don't? Pick up the Batman Adventures. And it got spiked because somebody up above thought it wasn't visually interesting enough. And I was like, oh my God, I've got Neil Gaiman raving about the Batman Adventures. Who cares what it looks like? So I really wish I'd kept a copy of that. I remember Matt Wagner called me up shortly after Batman Adventures number 13, the Talia issue. And he said, there will not be a better comic book published this year by anyone. And, Matt and I we'd worked together a little bit because he was doing Batman Grendel and he had done a bunch of covers for Detective Comics for me. But, we weren't buds. So for him to just call up out of the blue and give me just about the greatest compliment I can imagine, absolutely flabbergasted. But it never sold all that well. I mean, it sold well. Don't get me wrong. It was probably the least well-selling Batman book, and it probably sold in numbers that if it were to come out today, if it were selling those numbers today, it would be like the 7th best selling title for the month, because things were very different.
Yeah.
So it sold great, just not great in comparison to our other books. So issue 25, we put Superman in because it was an anniversary issue. We wanted to do something cool. And we were looking for, a little bit of a sales bump. The creative team was hoping for sort of the more classic Superman look, maybe even going more in a sort of Fleischer style. But for continuity's sake, it was decided to go with the then current look on Superman.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's really cool to read that issue and kind of see what could have been. Yeah. It's almost a different take on what the DC animated universe.
I was going to mention, you were talking about the comic not selling as well as it might today. Ted and I are little babies, and we grew up while this cartoon was on TV. And so my only memory of the show was just, hey, look, it's that awesome Batman show that it's on right now. I'm going to watch it. And as a little kid, you're not aware of ratings and that kind of thing. So I'm sure that the animated series and all the follow-up shows and everything are so iconic and nostalgic and everything to everybody nowadays, but I'm sure that at the time, you're talking about, maybe you were kind of struggling to get Batman Adventures into people's hands, I guess.
We absolutely were. I mean, the one of the goals from the very beginning, I took as our model the classic Chuck Jones Looney Tunes cartoons, right? Mm-hmm. So that any 4 or 5-year-old instantly captivated by Bugs Bunny or Roadrunner or Daffy Duck or whatever it is. But you never, ever get too cool for it, right? You see it when you're 14 or 15, and you're instantly like, oh, I loved these. You watch them when, and I can tell you, you're 45, you watch them, and you're like, first of all, this is even funnier than I remembered. Second of all, I've seen some of these gags literally 20, 30 times. They still make me laugh.
Yeah.
And number 3, I'm constantly blown away by the inventiveness, the sophistication of the storytelling. It's exquisite. It's phenomenal. And that was always what I was going for with the Adventures line, was it should be accessible to the youngest readers with an absolute minimum of nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Let's try to slip something dirty in there. But if you do it right, it is going to be the kind of thing where, John Van Fleet or Neil Gaiman or Matt Wagner goes, my God, this is fantastic. Yeah. And it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's very descriptive of just that animated universe as a whole, at least for the most part. Because, when I was growing up watching them, there was just that kind of unspoken, hey, I feel like, this is more meant for older kids or adults or whatever, but you can't really put your finger on why. But yeah, that's definitely something that I appreciated about the shows and the comic spin-offs of said shows. I think
my parents had an age limit for me. I think I was in first grade when they were finally okay, you can start watching that Batman show now. But yeah, I have this vivid memory too of having the Mask of the Phantasm VHS set, right, the tape, and pulling it out and having an advertisement in there for the Batman Adventures, a subscription. Yeah. Right, it was in the mail, and I remember signing up for it, right, or about to put in the mail, getting a letter back that said oh, this series has been discontinued. It must have either been Batman and Robin Adventures or even Gotham Adventures by that time. It was like that, it had evolved into the other series, but. So I found Gotham Adventures.
Dang! I love a happy ending.
Yeah, exactly.
The Batman Adventures had quite a few specials that involved creative talent from the cartoon itself, like Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and those guys, and the Mad Love or the holiday specials or various characters that got introduced into the show, starting in the comics like Roxy Rocket and stuff. Did the Batman Adventures, how do you think the Batman Adventures got to be sort of a launching pad for actual episodes of the animated series from the humble beginnings that you spoke of before?
Well, what happened, my understanding of what happened, one, they were a lot of the creators were at least a little bit trepidatious when they found out there was going to be, a tie-in, because understandably they thought of the animated show very much as their baby.
Yeah.
So I think they were a little bit nervous about what guys over on the East Coast were going to do with their beloved offspring. But they pretty quickly, I think, Kelly's scripts were phenomenal. Ty Templeton is Ty Templeton. He's a genius. Rick Burchett, one of the 2 or 3 most underrated artists of the 90s. Later, Brad Rader had been, that rhymed. Brad Rader later came on to do issues 4, 5, and 6. He had worked on the animated show, which is how I got to know him. And I think they started feeling a little more comfortable. And I know once Mike Parobeck came on with issue 7, these guys were professional artists. It's impossible for a professional artist to look at Mike Parobeck's work and not be blown away. Mike was such an amazing artist. His anatomy and perspective was absolutely flawless. His storytelling was brilliant. It was clear, dynamic, inventive. He was, the energy, the stuff just jumped off the page. He was phenomenal. So at a certain point, I think they became pretty comfortable with us. Later, one by one, they'd either be in town on business or family, or we'd meet at conventions or whatever. And, we just gradually got to know people. We got to know each other. And that's the thing, right, is that these guys were all comic book fans.
Yeah.
So they, in a sort of kind of like all musicians seem to want to be actors and all actors want to be musicians, I think they always wanted to do comics. And this was a chance where they weren't going to give up their day job. They weren't going to have to give up their day job. That was the nice thing. They could work on a comic, a one-shot, a special, a short story, whatever, miniseries on the side while still doing their day jobs. And they knew we were going to have a good creative relationship, and it just worked really, really nicely. So it was just a very organic thing. I'm pretty sure that at some point, I don't know when, I made the offer to Paul and Bruce, anytime you guys want to do something, it's an absolutely completely open door. Worked out great for me.
Yeah, it's really cool. I was going to add one thing to that. I talked to you a while ago about our timeline that we're working on for all these shows and everything. I was asking you lost years questions that you sort of knew the answer to. I've gone through every issue of the Batman Adventures with a fine-tooth comb, trying to pick out where does this issue fit in the timeline? Where does this issue fit in the timeline? Everything, and out of the 36 Batman Adventures and however many Batman and Robin there were, there is only that one issue with Superman in it that does not work in the animated series continuity. And I was like blown away because the Justice League Adventures comic is almost its own separate universe. Like there's so many contradictions every issue with the cartoon and everything, but the Batman Adventures was very fluidly just sunken in as if it's part of the cartoon that's just storyboards or something that never became episodes or whatever. Was there, I just want to know from personally, I guess, was there some kind of other than just like the Bible and character designs and that kind of thing, was there any sort of timeline or events of continuity or anything that you guys shared between the cartoon and the comics, or was it just coincidence that it all worked out as well as it did?
It wasn't exactly coincidence. It was by design in a larger sense. Everybody working on it were huge fans. So we watched every episode as they came out.
Right.
But because of the need to work so far ahead, that wasn't enough. So the idea always was sort of, again, to go back to a classic Looney Tunes cartoon, it was almost to have no continuity. We were following the backstories and continuity as established by the animated series. Mm-hmm. But what we would try to do is, with the exception of the issues before Harvey Dent became Two-Face, we weren't going to change any of the characters, heroes, villains, supporting characters, in any way that would make a future issue or future episode difficult or contradictory in any way. So basically the idea was tell the best Poison Ivy story possible using the animated version of the character. Don't establish any continuity. Don't establish that whatever, she's got a stepfather named so-and-so.
Right.
Give her a tattoo that can never be removed, whatever. Just within these parameters, tell the best story possible set in this universe.
So I guess you just kind of lucked out then, sort of, that a lot of the time they just didn't decide to, I guess, contradict on the show something that you guys had written, and in fact several times incorporated stuff that you guys had written.
Yeah, I think, again, it was to some extent a mutual admiration thing, although I would guess it's more just lucky happenstance. I'm quite confident that they read every issue more or less as they came out because they got them all free. But I doubt they went too far out of their way to change things to fit our continuity. Yeah. I think it's just, working the way we worked and working the way they worked. I think it just worked out nicely.
I'll take it.
So, yeah. You and Tim Levins enjoyed a lengthy 4-year run on Batman Gotham Adventures, which was the tie-in to the new Batman Adventures when the animation style was streamlined to match the Superman animated series. So what was the process like? Well, first of all, I guess tell us a little bit about your transition from being the editor to the writer. And then if you could talk about your process working with Tim Levins and maybe some of your favorite memories on the series.
I have no good memories of the series because I hate Tim Levins.
No. I'm sure that's
I still love
I thought you were serious there for a second, honestly.
No, I'm hoping that for once he'll actually listen to something that I've said and actually listen to this and get to that point and think, Bart? But no, yeah. Tim and I love Tim. We still are in email contact. We still work together when we can. Love the guy to pieces. One of my favorite artists, phenomenal artist, great guy.
Yeah.
When my first kid My daughter Kate was about 21 months old. She was diagnosed with leukemia. She and my wife basically spent the next year in the hospital. It was a very advanced case. She's all better now. She's about to start her last year of college. Everything's great. But it kind of changed my priorities a bit. Up until that point, I had thought I was going to be not the next Julie Schwartz because there could be no other Julie Schwartz, but kind of a lifer. I had at that point thought I am going to be one of these guys. You know, I'm going to be an editor at DC Comics for the next 45 years. Mm-hmm. And after that happened, I thought, you know, I don't think I want to spend 50 to 60 hours a week not around my kids anymore. So when my wife was getting ready to give birth to our second kid, I decided to go freelance. My wife's a children's novelist, and she had more work than she could take and be a stay-at-home mom, so I was going to be a stay-at-home dad. I was home for about 3 or 4 weeks, something like that, when the editor of the Gotham Adventures, Darren Vincenzo, asked if I wanted to write a fill-in issue, and I did. So I wrote it, and I was very much hoping that Rick Burchett was going to be the artist, since he was the artist on the regular series. Right. And Darren said, no, we're going to have a fill-in artist to go along with the fill-in writer. It's this new kid that I just discovered, did this creator-owned series with Jay Torres, the Copybook Tales. That's great. You're really going to like him. And I was like, I don't know. He's no Rick Burchett. But I got the pencils, and I was like, oh, my God, I like this kid. So Darren asked me to do another issue and then a couple more. And then next thing I knew, I was the regular writer and Tim was my regular penciler. And I was ecstatic. He's phenomenal. He works versatile, but he's on a technical level superb when it comes to perspective and anatomy. His storytelling is flawless. And there's a warmth to his stuff that words fail me. I love his stuff so much.
So yeah, guys like Tim Levins, Rick Burchett, Ty Templeton, all those guys that you've worked with on these various series, they're all more or less mimicking Bruce Timm's style that are on the cartoons. But you know, I can always look at without looking at who's drawing it, I can look at them and be like, oh, that's Tim Levins or whoever, and just the subtleties. Did you ever encounter any weirdness with like someone being like, I have to copy this style, why can't I do my own style, or anything weird like that?
No, actually it was just the other way around. I had people like John Byrne and Kelly Jones and Klaus Janson say, God, if you ever need a cover, a pinup, a story done, I would love to try working in that style. Yeah. No, it's just the opposite. I mean, here's the thing. Anyone knows going in that it's a little bit like being handed like, hey, guess what? You get to do Spider-Man. And the person saying, okay, but I don't want to draw him in the costume.
Yeah.
It's just, going in, that's part of the gig, right? Yeah. That's how it was. If you're doing an animated show, you're going to be working in the animated style. And if you're not cool with that, then don't take the gig. It's just, right? That's just kind of the way it is.
Well, it's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to toot my own horn. I've been practicing that style my whole life, pretty much. As soon as I could pick up a piece of paper and a pencil, and so I can totally see the desire to to be part of that history and legacy of that kind of stuff. So. All right, I'm going to move on to your favorite question. You in Gotham Adventures 26, the entire issue is a fight between Batman and some assassins that are all after a baby that Batman is trying to protect. And so how did you possibly choreograph the fight sequences in this issue? And who on the creative team was dealing with fatherhood anxiety at the time?
So that was definitely me. I think my wife was pregnant with our third kid at the time. And I, meanwhile, she and I would each, we were stay-at-home parents half the day and freelance writers the other half. So I was always either writing Batman or I had a kid or two in my arms or I was cooking dinner or something like that. So that was definitely, I checked with Tim. Tim's son, James, wasn't born until 2003, and that issue came out in 2000, so that was definitely all me. Yeah, I have no idea how. I assume I was feeling beleaguered one day, and that's where the idea came from. That is the work for which currently Tim and I are best known, definitely on Tumblr. That thing has been that thing has got like 200,000 retumbles on Tumblr. So reblogs, yeah, that is a delightful issue. I'm very, very pleased with the way that came out for the most part.
Well, I'm glad that it's something you're proud of and not something you resent or anything.
Yeah. I knew we had to ask you about it. We had.
Yeah, no. It's. Listen, I'm pretty happy with almost every issue of Gotham Adventures. As with almost everything, I'm not sure there's an issue that I couldn't look at and go, oh God, I wish I could redo that one balloon, or that line of dialogue, that sequence, whatever, didn't work quite as well as I would have liked. Speaking simply of my own work, I never have any problems whatsoever with the penciling, inking, lettering, coloring. But yeah, I mean, I'm never 100% happy with my own work, but that issue comes pretty close. I'm pretty happy with that issue.
It's a great one.
Yeah, Tim did such a phenomenal job. He, in terms of choreographing, I still have the script, so I assume I suggested what happened in each panel. Not positive. I do know that very few people have picked up on the Seinfeld reference.
Oh, I'm gonna have to check it out.
Should I tell you?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's one panel during the whatever it is, 3 or 4 pages, where it's just Batman holding the baby and going back and forth between his regular night, right? Where in one place he's like putting out a fire, and another one he's fighting off the mafia. Then he goes back and he's like covering up a homeless person who's cold with a blanket. And in one panel, cradling the baby, and he's driving a bus while you can see the bus driver's having a heart attack.
Oh,
and it's from the episode where George says where Kramer the bus driver has the heart attack, so Kramer takes over, and George says, "You're Batman." He says, "I am Batman."
No, nice. That's good. Yeah.
So many of your issues use pretty minimalistic writing, which allows Tim's art to really breathe on the page. So like you said, you probably write like every panel has a direction. But were there ever any issues that you recall that was specifically like Tim Levins was like, I've got a really cool, splash page or whatever?
Well, two things. One, as we got more comfortable, I would sometimes say, here's the first panel, here's the last panel. How Batman gets from A to B is up to you. Or I would just throw out ideas and say, the next 3 pages, here are ideas for 9 panels, put whatever panels on whatever page you want, Batman, blah, 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 that kind of thing. And Tim would pace it out and decide what shots go where and that sort of stuff. And he's a great artist, so his eye is so much more sophisticated than mine. He's so much more inventive. He's so much more creative when it comes to that. My only question, it wasn't a question of can I trust him? Obviously I could. It was how much is fair to him. Some artists want as much freedom as you can give them. Other artists think, come on, man, do your job. Like, don't push this off on me. And it varies from artist to artist. Some artists want as much freedom as you want, as they can get. Other artists might feel that way, but at the same time, dude, I got to do, 9 pages this week. Come on, help me out. So it varies.
But it sounds like the two of you developed a good shorthand. Sort of style communication after a while.
Yeah, I was going to mention I follow Tim Levins on DeviantArt, and he posts Gotham Adventures pages every once in a while, and he talks about how you guys had kind of a rapport with, like he showed a page with Batman sneaking into like a castle that Ra's al Ghul is hiding out in, and how you gave him kind of the notes of like, Batman's on top of the roof, and then by the end of the page he's facing face to face with Ra's al Ghul, do whatever you want, and then there's just a bunch of punching and backflips and doors closing and all this stuff in like 4 total panels, and it's just the most ridiculous thing. Yeah.
He's so good.
Yeah.
I introduced when I was an editor at Wildstorm. At one point, I was doing a story with J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen.
Nice.
And obviously, their go-to guy, right, is always Kevin Maguire. Phenomenal. In fact, I'm not sure that any comic book has ever had a more mind-bogglingly great run of pencilers than their original run on Justice League, where it went Kevin Maguire, Ty Templeton, Adam Hughes. It just, oh my God, impossible to believe how great those three guys are. So they were looking for a penciler for something. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it might have actually been a DC project that I didn't even have anything to do with, but I was talking to either Giffen or DeMatteis, and they were saying, you know, they were having trouble finding somebody, but it was supposed to be in that, as they call it, the bwahaha style, right?
Gotcha.
The very expressive faces. You need somebody who can draw really subtle facial expressions, which is not something many artists can do because it's, first of all, incredibly hard. Second of all, it's not what most young comic book artists practice, right? They practice Thor and Superman punching each other as hard as they can, or they practice the scariest Joker ever, but they don't really practice Captain Marvel looking exasperated. You know, that's just, so there aren't many. So I sent them, I was like, hey, what do you think about this guy? And I sent them Tim Levins. They were both like, who is this guy and where did he come from? And why isn't he on everything? He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And indeed he is. And they ended up doing a couple issues with him that I think might have actually gotten canceled before any of it ever came out because they had to move them over onto other things or something like that. I don't remember what the thing was, but they loved him. And understandably so. He's, you know, Tim is so the real deal. Tim co-wrote with me. He plotted, I think it's issue 50. Is that the Catwoman issue?
I believe you.
With the really great Darwin Cook cover, I think.
Yes. The painted cover, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so Tim actually co-plotted that with me, or mainly plotted it, and then I wrote the script on top of that. And unfortunately, it didn't get into the credits. So I like to point that out when I can.
Oh.
Because I think it just says written by Scott Peterson, but it should have said, like, story by Tim Levins and Scott Peterson.
He's not just a pretty face.
I am not. You're right. I'm not that pretty. When you asked about choreographing and minimalist to let the art shine, I'm just, you know, comics is a visual medium. Even though some of my favorite, you know, I am just about the world's biggest Alan Moore fanboy. And obviously Alan has had certain comics that were more than a little bit verbose.
Yeah.
But never, excessively so. Never. And he also always, you know, even at that time, when they were verbose, it tended because that was part of the character's character. But then he would have these long silent sequences and let the art shine. And that's, it's sort of like the old Edgar Allan Poe thing about every single thing in your story has to be there or else cut it out, right? If that comma is unnecessary, cut the comma. If that line, that character, that subplot, whatever, cut it. So my feeling is I, as a writer, try to write as few balloons as I possibly can. You know, I want the art to shine as much as possible. It's a visual medium. So most of the stories that I tell do require some word balloons, and some of them require a lot of word balloons, but I really try to put in absolutely as few as I can. In fact, that's usually what my rewriting is about. The way I tend to write is I am a proponent of the get it down first, get it right later school of, you know, school of thought, where I just try to get the first draft done and then I go back and I make it better. And the way I usually do that is I try to cut like 20% of the words out in the second draft, something like that. And fortunately, working with somebody like Tim makes that very, very easy.
The Gotham Adventures had a lot of guest stars from the expanded DC universe that we hadn't seen yet in the cartoons, or very briefly, like Flash and Superman were in there. But then you've also got like Phantom Stranger and Deadman and Huntress and all these guys that you guys basically introduced before they ended up on like the Justice League cartoon and future stuff. What was the process like behind expanding the animated Batman into the broader DC universe?
Well, that was one of those places where I was acquiescing generally to my creative teams. That was something that I actually wasn't crazy about, was doing animated versions of characters that hadn't been on the animated show yet. I actually didn't really think that it was our place, although we were legally able to do it, and although I think that creatively it worked out really nicely, I thought that we really should allow Bruce and that entire amazing crew, we should give them the right of first refusal. We should allow them the opportunity to do the first version the first appearance of whichever characters.
Yeah.
People frequently wanted to bring in some of their favorite characters because I tried to say no as little as possible because, I wanted them to be excited about the project. I wanted them to have fun.
Yeah.
And I thought I might be wrong. Maybe feeling the way I did was unnecessary. So I didn't want to be, a stick in the mud. That wasn't something that I was actually all that nuts about. I didn't know there was going to be a Justice League series.
Yeah.
So, I couldn't have known that they were going to use whomever, and therefore that I really shouldn't. I tended to discourage it as much as possible without outright saying no, with the result that, it did happen sometimes, and some of the stories were really, or all of the stories were really, really good. But that wasn't my favorite part about working on the books.
I can see that. I can understand your feelings toward, wanting Timm and Dini and those guys to have first say in how a certain new character would be introduced into the animated universe. But looking at the ones that I listed out, Huntress is the only one that really doesn't jive with what they wound up doing with the character on the Justice League cartoon, and the rest of them all more or less integrate with pretty well. They gel well with whatever they did on the cartoons, and so that may be, whether they told you or not, that may be a compliment, I guess, to your guys' introduction of those characters.
Well, one of the things that I did have going for me as an editor was, because I was working on a great property, I got to work with nothing but really, top-notch creators. Mm. So when you give a Ty Templeton, whether he's the writer, the penciler, the inker, the colorist, the letterer, when you get him on a story, it's going to be great. The only question is, what's going to happen in the story, not will it be good? Ty is, for my money, one of the 2 or 3 single most talented people to ever work in comics. Hmm. He is a great writer, a phenomenal artist. He's an amazing musician. He's a professional actor, mind-bogglingly talented, where comics are actually only a part of his talent.
Oh, for sure. I know that he and Rick Burchett are working on the Harley Quinn and Batman digital first web series right now. That's on Comixology. It's tying into the new Batman Harley Quinn movie. Definitely felt like a continuation of the Batman adventures.
Well, I can't imagine, more qualified individuals than those guys. I just, every chance I get to work with them or even just read their stuff, I'm just always overjoyed. As
a follow-up to your question, James, there were some villains that were introduced in the comics as well, not just the hero guest stars. One of the most notable being Anarchy in the Batman Adventures number 31. And we later saw some others like Black Mask and Sportsmaster and Bronze Tiger appear in the second volume of Batman Adventures. And I guess I was just wondering if there are any other villains that were ever maybe discussed or talked about, including like maybe a Mr. Zaz or Tallyman. Some like more obscure level ones. Some
of the warm and fuzzy.
Yeah. Exactly. No, not necessarily an eraser head or an egg head, but like, yeah.
Well, the reason Anarchy was an exception to my I'm not crazy about this idea rule. As I'm sure you guys are aware, that issue of the Batman Adventures was written by Anarchy co-creator Alan Grant.
Oh, that's right.
Who was actually doing me a favor by writing an issue, and he's like, hey, can I do an Anarchy story? And I was like, yes, you can.
Yeah.
Don't say no.
He had created the character. I was curious. I actually felt that there was an example of where he sort of did. Alan was the one who sort of had right of first refusal of Anarchy's first appearance.
Sure.
So as for the others, no. I can't think of any others that I wanted to use and never got a chance as either editor or writer.
So moving back to Gotham Adventures, number 51, we got a Mr. Freeze issue, which continued his tragic love story with his wife Nora from the Heart of Ice story in the animated series. And Jason Hall wrote that issue, and he would later pitch a sequel for Batman Adventures Volume 2, which would connect Mr. Freeze to his appearance in Batman Beyond. And Mr. Freeze had one of the most fleshed out, emotionally heartbreaking story arcs in the DC animated universe. What do you think makes this character work so well in this particular version versus his other incarnations?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because that is one of those places where the Joker, Poison Ivy, Ra's al Ghul, Two-Face, they were used brilliantly on the animated series and really, really well in subsequent adventures-style comics. Mm-hmm. But all of them were recognizably extremely well-done versions of what had already been in the comics for decades. A couple of the others, Killer Croc, Penguin, Catwoman, either took a while to find their footing or were in some way versions of previously seen examples from the comics, right? So Killer Croc has sort of had several different ways of being portrayed in the comics over the years, and the way that the animated series went with him was a sort of version of one of those versions, if that makes sense. Certainly, it took them a while to figure out, I think, what exactly they wanted to do with Catwoman, for instance. But with Mr. Freeze, they sort of, it seems to me, just plain reinvented him almost, just going with the name and saying, okay, brand new character, this is his name, these are his powers. Like, what should his origin be and what should his character be? Built him from the ground up, and it is just obviously a towering achievement, very possibly the single best episode of that entire brilliant run. Devastating, freaking devastating. Would have been still perfect if that had been the only time we ever saw him.
Yeah.
Like, absolutely no need for a sequel, and yet somehow they crafted him so expertly that there was room for him to continue on and for subsequent stories to be told with him. The combination of the devastating emotional backstory with the phenomenal intellect and immense physical power, man, I'll tell you, all the stars aligned with that one, where just, whatever cliche you want to go with, hitting on all cylinders, catching lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely positive why, other than what I just, the 3 minutes I just rambled about it. I'm not sure why it was so successful, but God Almighty, it certainly was.
It was a fresh take. I mean, it was so good. It garnished his own feature direct to DVD film. Sub-Zero.
That's a good point about the fresh take. Is many of us, those of us who weren't babies when it came out.
Hey, I was like 5. Okay. I was.
You know what? Intellectually, I still am. We had emotional connections to Mr. Freeze from to the character from the comics and from the Adam West TV show. But because of Paul and Bruce, it was such a fully rounded character with this, like I said, terribly tragic backstory, and yet really scary and dangerous at the same time. Sort of the way a viewer, a reader, is predisposed to like the protagonist, whether they're actually good guys or not, right? Even though Vito Corleone is a monster, he's the protagonist of the film, so you can't help it, or later Michael, you can't help it. Your sympathies are with him.
Right.
To some extent, I feel like that's Mr. Freeze. We were already predisposed to like him because, he was a Batman villain of whom we've heard, but suddenly he's given this unprecedented depth, and it sort of makes, I feel like, two different parts of the brain, the synapses start firing at once.
Yeah, the Heart of Ice episode, the first time that I saw it, I only caught the ending of it, when Batman defeats him with hot chicken noodle soup. And so I remember, that's all I saw for years, and people were just raving about how amazing of an episode it was, and I was just in a Condiment King mindset for it, going like, how is this cool? I don't understand. And then of course, getting the DVDs when they started coming out, and I got to watch the whole thing. I'm like, oh, that's what everyone's talking about. So,
That's awesome.
So you wrote a book called Batman Fights the Joker Virus, which has art in the anime style. Did doing those books for Capstone feel like writing another issue of Gotham Adventures or Superman Adventures?
Not exactly. Prose and comics, even when you're dealing with the same characters, are so different that the two different mediums, the two different media are so different that I feel like I use a different part of my brain. And I know not all comic book writers feel this way, because I've spoken with some of them, where the thing that many writers feel when they're writing prose, where they just sort of, it switches from one or both hemispheres to just one, and they sort of get in this zone, and they look up and, an hour and a half has gone by and they've written 5 pages and they barely remember any of it, and yet there it is. Right. That happens to me with prose. That doesn't happen very often to me with comics, because the format keeps me, I feel like, switching back and forth between the left and right sides of the brain, where the practical issues in terms of things like panels and shot descriptions and dialogue keeps bouncing back between the two hemispheres.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I've seen
with
that.
prose, I can just, even though it's Batman, I can sort of, hopefully when things are going well, enter the zone and just go. And that's what that felt like to me, writing the Batman Fights the Joker Virus one. Very different than writing comics, even though it was for the same characters and for the same or a similar age range.
Yeah, I've been meaning to pick up some of those. Whenever I found out about them, there were only a couple of them, but there's so many now that's kind of daunting. But yeah,
that is true.
It's all. I mean, even if the stories are tailored a little more toward a slightly younger audience than those that universe is usually set in, just the art style and those versions of the characters, I'll read anything that they're in. I'll watch anything that they're in. So, yeah.
Well, Tim has done a lot of them, and they all look, obviously, because he's Tim, they look great.
Right. Yeah. So after Batman Adventures and Gotham Adventures, you also were editor on the Lost Years comics, which take place between those two. But they were actually released after the new Batman Adventures aired. The Sins of the Father episode, which showcased Tim Drake becoming Robin. Were these in-betweener stories planned during the cartoon's run concurrently, or like with the animated producers having a say in them, or was the Tim Drake issue simply like adapted from the episode?
Yeah, I am afraid this is one of those places, gentlemen, where it was so long ago. My memory is not what it should be. What I recall is...
You have very vivid memories of Batman Adventures because it was a better time.
Exactly. Yeah. You know what? I was younger. I was 3 years younger, and that made all the difference.
Right.
I think I was approached by, like, either Paul or Bruce or both, and Hillary, and it was their idea to do this miniseries that bridged things. And because Hillary Bader was a writer on the show, they trusted her to get the continuity right and to explain the gap, explain what had happened, and that's where it came from. So that, it was a very deliberate, right? They wanted the show to be a surprise with the changes, but they didn't necessarily want it to be a secret forever. It was a dramatic way, a sort of, not really a flash forward, but starting, in media res, and then going back later and telling it. But
right.
I don't know whether they didn't want to tell it in animated style, whether it's each episode is so expensive, whether they weren't budgeted, whether, I don't know what the reason behind that was. All I know is that they wanted to do it this way, and, I was absolutely 100% game.
I had something to add to that, but you might not remember the answer anyway, so it's probably okay. Gosh, I wish I could remember what I was just going to say.
It was going to be so good.
I know. It'll come back to me, and if it doesn't, that's okay. So after there was a run by Adam Beechin on the Batman Beyond comic, and shortly after that was over, you stepped in and co-created a new Batgirl Beyond with Annie Wu, writer Annie Wu, and her appearances were there not very many of them because the series was pretty quickly relaunched into the 2.0. But did you have any further plans for that character? It was pretty enjoyable to see that kind of thing going with the Barbara Gordon mentoring and that kind of thing.
I had worked with Annie when I was on staff at Wildstorm. God, what a great artist. Mark Bernardin brought her to my attention, and I just fell in love with her stuff immediately and just really liked her as a person. When Wildstorm was closing down, Jim Lee asked me to pitch some stuff, and that was one of the things I pitched. You know, they asked who I wanted to work with, and on my wish list first was Annie, and loved working on that. We both had ideas for subsequent stories using that version of Batgirl set in that universe. We definitely, we know her whole backstory. We had ideas for where we could go with the character. Annie went on to become busy with first Hawkeye and then Black Canary. But she's always said that she would be very happy to make time in her schedule whenever DC wants to do more Batgirl Beyond. They asked about creating a new Batgirl. I was thinking about who the character should be, and one of the things that I remembered being 4 years old, identifying really heavily with Flash and Aquaman because we had the same color hair. And I thought, at that point, virtually every DC and Marvel superhero was a white male.
Yeah.
And the only thing that really varied was, did they have brown hair, blue hair, or yellow hair? A couple of them maybe had red. Very, very, very few were people of color, heroes of color. There weren't that many females, but even the females that they did have were, a Supergirl, a Batgirl, right? They were female versions of many of the existing male characters. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, God, if as a 4-year-old, having the same color hair as my favorite hero meant that much to me, what must it mean to look at a Justice League or an Avengers, and see 5, 6, 7, 10 characters, and none of them have skin tones that look like yours.
Right.
And conversely, how much must it mean when you finally do see one that you're like, wow, hey, that Green Lantern has the same skin tone as mine. It was just hair color, and it affected me.
Yeah.
So when it came to thinking about a new Batgirl, I thought, do we really need yet another Caucasian character when it could be absolutely any? Not to mention it's, 50 years in the future or whatever it is.
Right. Was it the decision from the beginning to make her an original character? Because I know for a while when Batman Beyond was on the air, there were a lot of people gunning for the Max character to become a Batgirl.
Yeah, it was. I wanted somebody original because while I thought that would be cool, one of the things that always really bothered me, so this would have been, let's see, about the time that you guys were, hold on, let me do the math. Not yet a twinkle in your father's eyes when the 1989 Michael Keaton Batman movie came out, Tim Burton, Jack Nicholson.
I was only -2. It's fine.
If you guys, okay, actually you guys have seen it, I assume?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So there's the bit where Jack Napier killed the Waynes, right?
Right.
Uh-huh.
Then Batman causes him to become the Joker, and then they have the big... And I thought, really?
Destiny.
With tens of thousands of bad guys, it's gonna be this one who, at the time, the guy wasn't even anybody. I hated the coincidence. I hated that. So that's the thing. If there's going to be like this new superhero that pops up, for it to be somebody that the heroes already know, I don't like that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Listen, it does happen, but if you go and you start a new job, you might run into somebody you know, but chances are you don't know any of these people, even if it's a fairly small town. If you're on a baseball team, the new catcher might be the son of somebody that you played with in a different league 15 years ago, but chances are not. It's going to be something completely new. That's what I liked. Was it wasn't just the fresh slate creatively. It's that just feels to me more like the way the world is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Do you watch the CW Flash TV show?
Oh yes. Although wait, I'm a season behind.
Oh, okay. Well, I was gonna bring
just starting the final season.
I was gonna bring up something from that, so I won't spoil anything for you. So a follow-up question to the Batgirl. I know you talked about you didn't like bringing in characters that hadn't already been established in the animated series. But did you guys ever have any plans for the other Batgirls, the non-Barbara Gordon Batgirls, like Stephanie Brown and Cassandra Cain, or any of those guys to make an appearance in one of your comics?
No.
Okay. Moving on. I'm just kidding.
No, you know what? I would, Kelly Puckett, over the previous 12 years, had probably written 3 times as many Batgirl stories as anyone else. And the funny thing is that he actually never likes the character for a long time. So I would always force him, be like, hey, it's time for another Batgirl story. He'd be like, oh, man, really? I'm like, yep, sorry. Gotta do a Batgirl story. Every 6 issues. Love Batgirl. Do Batgirl. He'd be like, man. And then he would do these great stories. They were phenomenal. He was so good with the character. So I never had any real interest in doing any other Batgirls as much as I loved the other Batgirls, because I liked this Batgirl. They're just, there weren't enough pages in a year. If I was going to do a Batgirl, I wanted to do the animated Barbara Gordon Batgirl. Just, God, I have been very honest with my wife that the Yvonne Craig Batgirl from the Adam West Show is the first woman I ever loved. So I have always loved Batgirl. I was the assistant editor, I think, on the first ever Stephanie Brown story when she was just the Clue Master's daughter.
Yeah.
Now, a dream project would be doing some sort of Batgirl project with basically all the various Batgirls over the years. But
yeah. So I want to ask you next about your work on video games, specifically Batman: Dark Tomorrow. I know you also did Superman: Man of Steel for the Xbox. I think they were both for the original Xbox and probably PlayStation 2 in that era. And so Batman: Dark Tomorrow, I had a copy on my GameCube, and it's a very difficult game to play. And I know you had nothing to do with the gameplay, but you wrote the cutscenes, and I guess did you have a hand in writing all the dialogue that was involved in the gameplay too, or I guess how's the writing process for a video game? We've talked a little bit about the difference between prose and comics, but how's a video game so much? I'm sure it's much more expansive, but.
Well, and that was the big thing, right, is that a good video game takes, 40, 50, 80 hours to play. An episode of the Gotham Adventures, you're done with it in between 3 and 10 minutes. So, big difference in terms of scope. I didn't really have, they weren't able at the time to, I think the guy who hired me for the gig was Greg Ross, who worked down in DC's licensed projects, something like that, but it's where they did prose novels and video games and stuff like that. And my recollection is Greg passed me off to a new hire named Mike Siglane, who I just absolutely fell in love with. Great guy, crazy smart, insanely hardworking, massive video game and comic book fanboy. He's actually in charge of Lucasfilm's publications.
Oh, nice.
These days. Yeah, he's another creative monster. Great guy. But my recollection is that he wasn't actually able to send me any video game scripts as an example of, make it look like that, because there kind of weren't any, or at least not any that he could get his hand on. And this was supposed to be the first video game that was using Batman continuity from the comics. They had done some that had sort of generic no continuity, some that had, I guess, animated continuity, but this was supposed to be the first one that had current DC Comics continuity, which is how I got to have things like Oracle, the Cassandra Cain version of Batgirl in there, and things like that. Basically, whenever I would say, hey, can I? Mike would say, yes. And I'd say, well, how about? And he'd say, yes. And I'd say, I was thinking it might be like this. He'd say, that'd be good, but make it 3 times as big. It was phenomenal. The creative freedom was intoxicating. And I was just very barely a gamer at the time. I had loved video games when I'd been in high school, but I hadn't played any at that point in well over 10 years. So DC bought me a PlayStation, a half dozen games that with which I should get acquainted so I could write this. And I don't even remember which. It was like the second Tomb Raider. Like it was that early that it was like only her first or second. So yeah, so I sort of had carte blanche. And so yes, I wrote the cutscenes and I wrote a lot of the gameplay. I think virtually 0.000% of which ever actually made it into the game, which I didn't really realize that sort of wasn't really what I was being hired for. So, because again, I was off the edge of the map. This, as far as I know, had rarely, if ever, been done before, or if it had, so few times that there was no roadmap for me to follow. I was just kind of making it up as I went. But the opportunity, I got to write all these mini Batman movies. God, it was intoxicating. And yes, I would also do things like a half dozen canned responses for the various civilians or bad guys or, minor mooks or whatever to use during the gameplay. But the main thing that I was doing was the cutscenes.
Yeah, and I remember that game pretty much had every single character in Batman's, all of Gotham City was in that game. It was awesome.
It was when the stuff that I got to do in Arkham was, God, so much fun. So much fun.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier about your time as an editor at Wildstorm. And I wanted to ask, I saw that you worked on Wildcats and Authority, and those are, some of the main pillars of Wildstorm for sure. And you mentioned earlier that you worked on some of their licensed properties too, like Ben 10, I think you said might have been part of Wildstorm, but I know Fringe, J.J. Abrams' Fringe tie-in book with the television series was part of that as well. So what other fond memories do you have of your time as an editor there, and what are some of the projects that you worked on that you're the most proud of?
That is a good question. I would say, so to go with what you had already said and talk about the Fringe comic book.
I loved Fringe. That was such a good series.
Yeah, it was great. One of the things that was so enjoyable about the Fringe tie-in, I did the second volume, Tales from the Fringe, and it was, oh my God, it was just nothing but a pure delight. Alex Katznelson was a staff writer on the show, and he and the other staff writers were the ones who wrote the stories, which made getting approvals a piece of cake because they were all staff writers, so they understood what wasn't acceptable. And when we would send things over for approvals, the people whose job it was to approve them would be like, "Hey, Alex, is this okay with you?" And Alex would be like, "Yeah, I wrote it." They're like, "Ah, it looks great." But the other thing was they were all so incredibly pleasant. Alex was pretty much my only contact. I don't recall talking to any of the other writers, even though there were a bunch of other writers. I had these great artists like Fiona Staples, the brilliant Fiona Staples, or I had, Dave Lapham. I had David Hahn. And one of the nice things was that these various staff writers, Alex and his colleagues, they were so open creatively where the artist might say, "Hey, this is great, but it's 8 panels. Can I combine these and make this like a 5-panel page? We won't lose any dialogue." Alex would be like, "Yeah, if the artist thinks that works better, I'm sure the artist knows what he's doing." So it was just
nice.
So now the artist is all excited because you don't usually get that kind of freedom on a licensed book. So yeah, that was a delightful series to work on. Working on licensed properties usually is okay. A lot of times really sucks. Fringe was awesome to work on. Absolutely delightful. The great artists, actually I got to work with Tim Levins on Fringe. Derek Robertson, Fiona Staples. How can I first worked with Fiona on the Trick or Treat adaptation. That was another incredibly enjoyable experience. And from there, we did Jack Hawksmoor, writer Mike Costa, who's now a staff writer on the Lucifer TV show. Really good book, great writer. Maybe the best new writer I've ever encountered, where his first script out of the gate I would have thought was more like his 20th. Comics is a really hard medium. The technical aspects are so tricky. Anytime you do a new job, whether it's whatever, driving a bus or your first time in court, right? It's really hard your first couple days, your first couple times. Same thing with writing, right? First time you, write a sonnet, it's not going to be good. It's going to be really hard. And comics is one of those things where you can take really established screenwriters or novelists and have them write a comic book. And because they now have this really strict format within which they have to stay, only so many pages for the story, only so many panels per page, only so many balloons per panel, only one action per panel, and it takes a lot of outstanding veteran writers a really long time to get used to that. Mike's first script, boom, absolutely nailed it right out of the park. So he did Jack Hawksmoor with Fiona Staples, and then I grabbed her to do North 40 with Aaron Williams, the wonderful writer-artist of PS238 and the Nodwick Chronicles. So you were asking which Wildstorm projects I was proudest of, and those are several of them.
And I would imagine writing stories for Scooby-Doo and Looney Tunes are pretty different.
You know what? I'll tell you, writing Scooby-Doo was one of the hardest gigs I have ever had. No kidding.
How do you write dialogue for a dog that every word starts with R?
Dude, that is exactly it. That's one of the problems. It's really freaking hard because, right, it has to be clear. So oh man, was that hard. It's like this. The way I thought of writing Scooby-Doo, or the way I've tried to describe writing Scooby-Doo, is like, imagine you have to write a knock-knock joke. Imagine it has to conform to the format of a knock-knock joke. It has to be, generally speaking, fairly short. It has to be funny. It has to be surprising. You know how knock-knock jokes go, right? So write one that is authentically a funny knock-knock joke. Now write 15 more of them. That's what was so hard about it. Like writing one knock-knock joke that's really funny, all right, I could probably do that, I suppose. I don't want to, but I suppose I could. But now I have to do that over and over again. It was just really difficult. It was fun, but wow, do you get no respect, generally speaking, for writing Scooby-Doo? And that's the tricky part, is that it's the hardest. Writing Scooby-Doo is so much harder than writing Batman. I am very glad I did it. I'm actually really proud of a couple of them, including Scooby-Doo stories with, yes, Tim Levins.
Oh, nice. Yep.
It was one of those deals where the pencils came in, Scooby, Shaggy, Velma, Fred, Daphne, only they're by Tim Levins. They're exactly on model. They look the way they always look, except they're so dramatic. Like the storytelling, it's so awesome. His camera angles, his layouts, they're so good.
That's awesome.
So I can tell you definitely hate Tim Levins, as you said before.
I hate that guy.
It shows.
Did you hear me, Tim? Are you listening, Tim? No, you went to sleep already, didn't you?
Yeah. Were you responsible for creating your own monsters and stuff too, or did you use ones from from Scooby-Doo?
The one thing I wasn't allowed to do is the thing that you're thinking of, which is, and I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for meddling kids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was one of the rules that the editor that I had at the time wouldn't let me do.
You can't even sneak in and I would have, and then someone cuts him off or something.
Oh, see, that would have been funny. That would have been funny. I said, what about a story where it's nothing but over and over and over, and I, ripping off the mask, and I would have gotten it, Farmer Brown, and I would have gotten away. And he said, yes, if you can make that work, that you can do. And I never did it because I kind of quit Scooby-Doo not long afterwards. But yeah, I've always regretted that.
Well, you wrote a bunch of original projects of your own too. I kind of scoured your blog and did some research, but I saw you have a book, Game Over, which is a young adult book. You have a novel series called Inheritance, and you have a few short story collections under the title Uncivil War. I was just hoping you could tell us a little bit about those.
Game Over was actually something I wrote that 2005 or something like that, 2006. It was shortly before I went back on staff at Wildstorm. And I had this idea, and I just sat down, and I thought, it wasn't a comic book, and I sat down, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to try this and see what happens. And I wrote it over the course of whatever, like 6 weeks or something. It was my first time writing prose, and I kind of fell in love with the process. It's what I was talking about before, where I suddenly felt like it was I was able to lose myself in the story in a way that I almost never was with comics. And I was done with it, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this now. And then I went on staff at Wildstorm, so I didn't do anything with it. And when the whole Amazon self-publishing thing happened a few years back, I thought about that, and I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll update this and just, it's just sitting on my hard drive. I'll just toss it up on Amazon, and if nothing happens, nothing happens, and if a couple, dozen people buy it, awesome. I looked at it, and I thought, you know what? So I wrote this, whatever, it's now 10 years out of date. I should update it. And then I thought, you know what? I'm not even going to update it. Instead, I'll set it in the past rather than update the tech at all. And yeah, that's where that came from. So once I did that, that was so enjoyable. That's when I did Uncivil War. I have 2 volumes of Uncivil War up on Amazon. One is called The Island, and it's a novella. The other is called After the Fall, and it's a series of short stories and vignettes set in various different parts of the country. The way it started, the idea for the Uncivil War is I have a lot of family and friends that are far, far to the right and a lot that are far, far to the left, and then obviously quite a few who are centrist. And, I've lived in very blue cities, and I've lived in very red small towns. We're from all over this country, and we've got friends and families and coworkers who are everywhere on the spectrum. It's been very uneasy over the last 20 years watching, since about 1994 as current situation is not exactly new. It's way more extreme, but this is where we've been going for 23 years now. I read a little something somewhere, I think it was about the Balkans, and the thing that I was reading was in the late 90s. And it was just kind of a throwaway line that said something about never in history has there ever been a civil war that truly ended. The fault lines, rupture once again. I think it even said the exception is the American Civil War. And I remember thinking, is that true though? Even if it is, it hasn't ruptured yet. But I remember when I first came up with the idea in the late 90s, I thought that the fracture was going to be over, and this seems bizarre now, same-sex marriage. The reason for the rupture, if it happens, has changed several times since then. But, it just does seem not very likely, but way more likely than it should be. And if it were to happen, it would be so completely and totally horrific. There would be no winners. It's nothing but losers. But I'm not sure that having a lose-lose scenario is enough to keep it from happening. I don't really think it's going to happen. I think the odds are extremely low, but they're not zero, and they really should be. And boy, there are a lot of good stories to be told set in that reality. So,
well, thank you for sharing that stuff about your original work. We can talk about Batman all day, but it's really interesting to hear about your, personal passions, I guess.
Well, you should. Hopefully, we can maybe do a little catch up in somewhere in say another year. When I can finally talk about the massive creator-owned original graphic novel that I wrote about 5 years ago, and which I just got all 280 pages of inks for.
Oh, geez.
Nice.
Yeah, it's big. Just got those a couple weeks ago, and actually, while I was talking to you, printer dropped off copies of all 280 pages, not the official printer as in the Staples.
Yeah.
Copy center guy, so that I can go through and tweak 280 pages of dialogue, which is going to be quite a task, but a very pleasant one.
Yeah, well, it's your stuff, so.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. Well, that was leading up to our next question. If there are any other upcoming projects you can tell us about. So.
Well, I've got this 280-page original graphic novel that's creator-owned that I can't talk about yet. But I also have 2 other projects I can't talk about, both of them with artist Kelly Jones, one creator-owned and one corporate-owned. But hopefully, so the corporate-owned one is the 6-issue miniseries, and 3 issues are penciled and inked. So hopefully, I get to talk about that soon.
So when's Batman Adventures Volume 3 coming?
I would love that. That's always a world I love delving back into, and it's never hard to get back into Gotham creatively, in terms of a mindset. Batman has been such a huge part of my life since I was 4 years old and watching the Adam West TV show and loving the Carmine Infantino comics and things like that. So yeah, whenever possible, I am all over that.
Nice. Yeah, I'll go ahead and wrap up our our conversation by bringing it back to that world. Do you have a favorite episode out of any of those shows? Batman, Superman, Justice League, even Static Shock or Zeta Project, if you wanted to. I know we talked about On Leather Wings and Heart of Ice a little bit, but
I'm gonna say that's.
There's only a couple. Come on. I'm just kidding.
Well, I would say it's virtually impossible to get better than Heart of Ice. I'm not sure you can have a greater episode than that.
2 thermoses of chicken noodle soup. I'm just kidding.
There is one that I maybe like even better, and it's Almost Got 'Em, which has everything. It's so funny. It's tense. It's got like 3 fantastic twists. One of my kids will say, "It was a big rock," at least once every couple of weeks. God, so funny, so well done.
And it's Batman the whole time saying that. So.
Yes. And they buy it, and that's the nice thing, right? Is that he understands the characters so well. And the reveal when the lamp starts swinging and his shadow, oh God, the final line by Catwoman. Every freaking thing about that episode works. It works brilliantly. See, you guys, man, you make me fanboy out.
That's what we do all day, so it's fine.
Yeah.
If it's possible that there is a better episode than Heart of Ice, then in a very different way, it would be Almost Got 'Em. That is what I'm going to say.
That's a good answer.
That's a great answer.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's it. We made it through everything. It only took like 2.5 hours. That's fine.
I know. I was going to say, don't you know what time it is on the East Coast?
Oh,
Yeah, sorry,
I know.
Next time we talk, remind me to tell you about the time Mark Hamill left my voicemail message, my outgoing voicemail message.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, no, we have to talk about that now.
No, we're not going to. It takes too long. That's what one calls a cliffhanger.
Okay, yeah, well, it'll keep the
Nice.
intrigue, you know? So. It's really interesting to get the insight, but as well as just kind of getting to know people like you who have been involved with the shows.
I like to think there are no people like me.
I didn't mean it offensively, I'm sorry.
And next time you got to get Tim Levins on.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Except don't, because that guy sucks.
right. All right,
Tim
well, thank you so
Levins.
much. It's been a pleasure speaking with you tonight.
No, thank you guys. This was great. Hope the rest of your evenings go well, and by the rest of your evenings, I mean except for those of you on the East Coast for whom it's already morning.
Yeah, exactly. I got 15 minutes left in the day.
Oh, all right, let's talk.
Boy, wasn't that fun, Ted, to speak
That
with
was
him?
great.
Yes. So it's time for comic relief, I guess. We'll try to make this quick as well because you're probably 5 hours into this podcast at this point. I've been reading the War of Jokes and Riddles. It's a newer Batman Rebirth thing, but I'm only a couple issues into it, so I don't have a lot to say. It's kind of cool so far with how it's all about the Joker can't laugh anymore. He can't smile. He's having troubles with that, and so he's just going around like murdering this guy or blowing up this thing just to see if that makes him laugh, and nothing's working. So then Riddler escapes Arkham and comes to Joker and is like, "Hey, I hear you can't laugh. Well, what if we team up and kill Batman? It's the only way to kill Batman. We can't do it alone. We keep trying millions of times." And Joker's like, "Oh, that sounds good." And then he shoots him in the chest, and then he's like, "Oh, that didn't make me laugh either." So, and then they just keep going, and I guess it will eventually devolve into this big tens of villains versus each other thing, but I haven't gotten that far yet.
My
did watch.
understanding,
Go ahead.
It's set in the past, right? It's kind of like
Yeah,
a big
it's
flashback
like Batman
story.
year 2 time-ish.
That's cool.
Which is kind of weird. Like, he's telling this whole story to Catwoman, who he has just proposed to in this continuity. So, yeah, I every time that they do a story like this, that's in the new 52-verse of sorts, whenever they flash back to like a Batman year 1 kind of time, I always think like, wait, so is this Because if Dr. Manhattan deleted 10 years of time, how long ago is this, and is it actually in this continuity? And like, I don't, it's too much. But I mean, it's probably not as comprehensive or as complicated as I think it is. It's probably just fine. But yeah,
I mean, that's DC cool continuity for you. It like changes all the time. So
yeah, well, like when they in
the understanding I think is like
also.
Yeah, like it's almost like some version of previous stories have probably happened in some capacity, but like the details always change. So
yeah. I did. My sister has not seen half of the like important Marvel movies, and we watched the Infinity War trailer, and she was like, "Well, that's cool, but I don't know who half those people are." So we're watching. Like she hadn't seen Winter Soldier or Civil War or any of the like these are the ones that you need to watch kind of things. So we've been watching those. We just watched Civil War a couple of nights ago, and I noticed for the first time that the I can't remember her name, something Woolard, actress in the movie. She was in Star Trek First Contact. Also, she's the lady that stops Tony Stark at the elevator and says like, "You killed my son. Here's a picture of him to remind you." She is also in Luke Cage as a completely different character.
Oh, wow.
That's like the main villain lady. So it's kind of like, I looked that up, like, has anyone else noticed this except for me? And then apparently she's like one of 10 or so actors in the MCU that have just played multiple people.
Wow.
Which is kind of weird. Yeah.
Like people who pop up in like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something have like a minor role.
That's kind of what I'm thinking, is maybe they're less obvious than that one. But like, I wonder if anyone's come up with some kind of fan theory about it, like it's the same person or something. But it probably doesn't work.
You're that person.
I wonder if all this timeline stuff we've been doing, it has seeped into my viewing of any other TV show. And so like, I'm watching SpongeBob in reverse so that it gets better over time, and I'm finally back into like season 1 stuff that's like the good episodes, and we just watched. This probably isn't season 1. I don't even know the seasons of SpongeBob, but we just watched like the episode where he thinks robots are taking over the world, and Mr. Krabs is a robot and all that stuff, and. Not the Navy, and there's a couple points in there where like every once in a while they'll be like, yeah, not since a year ago when this happened, or like last Sunday when this happened, and I'll be like, oh, I gotta take notes. But it doesn't like, it's just making me want to do a SpongeBob timeline. Yeah, but I probably should not do that because there's like hundreds of episodes.
Nope. Well, that's crazy.
Maybe someday. Yeah.
I watched 2 things. I watched Batman vs. Two-Face, which was a really cool animated movie. It's the last one Adam West did before he died. So Adam West, Burt Ward are back as Batman and Robin, Julie Newmar as Catwoman, and William Shatner, Captain Kirk, is playing Two-Face.
Right, yeah.
And it's a really crazy movie.
I like that Harvey Dent is just modeled to look like a young William Shatner.
He looks
like, he almost looks exactly like the Star Trek animated series Captain Kirk, so that's pretty cool.
It's a really silly movie. Like there's like Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne are like, "Oh yeah, you're my best friend." Like, of course, I want to help you. You're my best friend. And Burt Ward,
old
like,
chum.
Dick Grayson. Dick Grayson's like, "No, he's not your best friend. He's never been around. Like, he's never here. Like, who is this guy? Like, you're not best friends."
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
So there's like a little bit of
I've never seen him in my life.
Yeah.
Meta.
A little bit of tension there. And then like Aunt Harriet. You remember how Aunt Harriet was like living in the Wayne Manor with them, and like so she's always like, "Oh, the 2 young bastards going off on your fishing trips." Wink, wink. Like she's always like, Alfred, like they're doing each other. Like and
that's funny. They probably never. Yeah. Is that something they did in the old series, or is that something from the new movie?
I think it's just the new movie. Well, it was this one and Return of the Cape Crusader. They did it. It's in both of them. She's always talking about their fishing trips.
That's actually kind of an interesting viewpoint on that. Like, Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson are always just disappearing for hours or days at a time. Like, what are they doing?
Who knows? But
we'll check that book.
Animated movies are just crazy. They like escalate and they get super just out over the top and weird. Yeah, and it's kind of fun to watch that. So, like the first one has a bunch of time travel, and this one just has like just crazy supervillain science experiments.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
funny.
Well,
Like
Harley
apparently
Quinn is,
you
like,
get
in
hit
it,
by this
isn't she?
evil acid, and Harley Quinn's in it for a second. Yeah, and so is Hugo Strange, and like a couple of the '60s like B-list villains like Bookworm and King Tut actually have a lot to do. So, but
Is
then
there
you
an
still see
Egghead?
classics. Yeah, actually, I think Egghead is in there for a second.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, but then like Joker, Penguin, Riddler, like Catwoman, all the classics are still there too. So yeah, that's what I also saw. Freedom Fighters: The Ray.
I still have
it's
not
a
watched that.
6-episode thing on CW Seed. You can watch the whole thing. It's on there. The gist of it is it's about the Ray and Black Condor in like the regular Arrowverse. So it's like the one with Arrow and Flash, the Earth they live on. So, but like the crossover was set on Earth X. So
Yeah.
you still see stuff from Earth X, like the Ray and the Freedom Fighters are all there, and like this version of the Freedom Fighters has Black Condor, the Ray, Red Tornado, Dollman, and Phantom Lady, and so they're all fighting against the Nazis there, and like Overgirl and the evil version of Arrow and Flash. But this Flash actually might be Barry Allen instead of the Reverse Flash, Edward Thawne.
Yeah,
which is a little
I
weird.
noticed in like the trailers and stuff that there was there's backwards Earth X versions of all the main characters, but then in the actual crossover it was Reverse Flash. So I don't know what happened to the.
Me neither. It's
other
kind of hard
guy.
to say. But long story short, it's about Black Condor and the Ray from the regular universe, and they're dating. Ray hasn't come out to his parents because they're really conservative, and so there's like that. But then also the Ray from Earth X ends up crossing over into their universe, kind of putting the regular universe Ray on a path to become a hero.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, there's like there's multiple versions of him, and that's the gist of it.
Isn't Ray Tyrrell like the second Ray or something in the comics?
Yeah, his dad was the Golden Age one, but
Okay.
it's changed a little bit now because the Ray's been in Rebirth a little bit. He's one of the main characters of the JLA series.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't know if there's been a Golden Age Ray in this current continuity, but yep.
Well, cool. Yeah, I wish I had more to put into this segment, but
That's cool. That's all I got.
Yeah, I'm sure people are tired of listening to our voices by this point. Anyway,
Well,
so yeah, I guess
That's-
we'll
yeah.
wrap that up. Wrap this whole
Sounds
thing in
good.
a nice little Christmas bow. I hope everyone had a nice holiday that's listening to this. We right now it's 2018 now, and
No,
but
it's
for
not.
us it's still December 20th. So
Well, are we releasing this one on like?
the day
Oh, yeah,
on
maybe
New
it's,
Year's Day.
It might be the first. Yeah, New Year's Day. Wow, Happy New
Yeah.
Year's. Happy New Year's, everybody.
Ted is Jumanji, Robin Williams. What year is it? Anyway, thanks for listening. You can contact us at info@watchtowerdatabase.com, or you can we're on social media at DCAU Watchtower. That's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Our webcomic Legacies of the DCAU you can find at legacesdcau.com. What else?
We got a Patreon.
Yeah, we do. That's patreon.com/JTS Entertainment. That's our sort of coverall studio-y thingy that if you go there and you're like, oh, whoops, I thought this was Watchtower Database. It is. That's the answer.
Yes.
You can look at all the cool things you can get for giving us your nice little pennies and stuff. But honestly, even like the smallest amount really helps us out. So please, it's 2018. Where your New Year's resolution is to any YouTube channel that you go, oh, that's pretty cool. Check if they have a Patreon, because they need it just as much.
Support independent artists.
Everyone's doing their art thing, and anyway, if you are a patron and you're listening to this, thank you very much for that. And we will see y'all in the next episode in a couple weeks. Every other Monday is when this thing happens. Enjoy
good.
whatever happens between now and then. Have a good 2018 going
Cheers.
forward. I'm going to stop talking now because otherwise I'll just keep talking forever. Okay, bye.
Bye.